Ready to head in? You bet. Smells good already.
Chuck Norris pulled into the parking lot of Miller's Steakhouse like a man who had earned the right to a quiet evening. The sun was already low, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and red, and the smell of hickory smoke curled out through the restaurant's screen door and drifted right across the lot. He sat in his truck for a moment,
Has a gun on it. Okay. Where are you going?
windows down, just breathing it in. After months on the road, this was the kind of simple thing he had missed most. Not the crowds, not the cameras, just a good piece of beef and a little peace. He climbed out slow, rolling his neck once, his boots crunching across the gravel. The place looked exactly the same as it always had. Wooden sign above the door, a little weathered but still hanging proud. String lights along the roof. A hand-painted chalkboard in the window that read, Friday Special, ribeye, $18.99. He smiled at that. Some things in this world stayed steady, and that was worth more than most people gave it credit for.
Coming back till somebody remembers seeing Richie.
Inside, the Friday dinner crowd was in full swing. The clatter of silverware, the low hum of country music from a speaker in the corner, the warm glow of lantern-style lights hanging above every table. Families filled most of the booths. A couple of old-timers sat at the counter nursing coffee like they had nowhere better to be. A group of kids in soccer uniforms was piled into the big round table near the back, arguing over who got the last bread roll. Chuck let himself take it all in. He spotted his usual table without even thinking, the two-seater by the far window where you could see the whole room without anyone sneaking up behind you. Old habit. He walked toward it, nodding to a few folks who recognized him, keeping it brief, keeping it kind. He had just settled into his seat and set his cap on the table when the front door opened, and the whole room seemed to shift a little, the way a room does when someone big walks into it. Steven Seagal filled the doorway for just a moment, his dark jacket hanging easy on his broad shoulders, his long hair tied back, his eyes doing that quiet sweep of the room that said he had walked into 100 different places and already knew exactly what this one held. Chuck raised a hand. Over here. Steven's face opened into something warm and genuine as he crossed the room. The two men stood and clasped hands, then pulled each other into a hug, slapping each other on the back the way old friends do when too much time has passed. Didn't think you were going to make it, Chuck said. Almost didn't, Steven said, sliding into the seat across from him. Flight got rerouted through Dallas. You know how that goes. They settled in, the easy quiet between them, the kind that only comes with people who have known each other long enough to not need to fill every second with words. A young waitress came over a minute later. She looked maybe 19 or 20, her dark hair pulled back in a braid, her uniform neat, her name tag a little crooked. It said Cara. She was carrying 2 menus against her chest, and when she got close enough to see clearly who was sitting at table 7, she stopped so fast she almost tripped over her own feet. Chuck smiled up at her the way he always smiled at people who were nervous around him, gentle and unhurried, like there was no place he'd rather be than right here talking to her. Hi there. Cara blinked. Hi. Good evening. Her voice came out a little squeaky, and she cleared her throat. Welcome to Miller's. Can I start you both off with something to drink? Iced tea, Chuck said. 2 sugars, no lemon. Same, Steven said, already glancing over the menu even though from the look on his face he already knew what he wanted. Cara scribbled it down, nodded too many times, and headed toward the drink station. Chuck watched her go and noticed the way her shoulders carried something more than just first-night nerves. There was a tightness there, the kind you get when you're not just nervous but actually afraid. Steven had noticed too. He set the menu down. She looks rattled. Chuck nodded slightly. Give it a minute. The iced teas arrived. Cara set them down carefully, both hands steady, but her eyes doing this quick flicking thing, darting toward a table on the other side of the room. Chuck didn't follow her gaze right away. He waited until she had her notepad ready. What can I get for you, gentlemen? Ribeye for me, Chuck said. Medium rare. Baked potato, loaded. Side of greens. Steven ordered the same, then added a cup of the house soup to start. Cara wrote it all down, gave another too fast nod, and turned to go. She made it 3 steps before she stopped. Chuck watched her stand there for a moment, her back to them, something working itself out inside her. Then she turned around and came back to the table. She leaned in, and her voice dropped so low that the country music almost swallowed it whole. "Mr. Norris," she said, "there are some men here tonight who know you came in." She paused, her jaw tight. "They're saying they plan to make sure your evening doesn't go the way you're hoping." Chuck set his glass down slow. He didn't look across the room yet. He kept his eyes on her. "Which table?" She didn't point. She barely moved. "Corner booth by the mounted buckhead. 4 of them. The one in the gray shirt, that's Deke Halford. He owns a lot of the commercial property in this county." He smiled, but it didn't touch anything real in her face. "He doesn't like certain kinds of attention coming into places he considers his." Steven kept his voice low and even. "What kind of attention does he consider his?" Kara's eyes went briefly to the soccer kids in the back, to the old man at the counter, to a young couple near the window, holding hands across the table, their skin a different shade than most of the room. Then back to Chuck and Steven. "The kind he can't control," she said quietly. Chuck looked at her for a moment. "Thank you for telling us." She nodded, turned, and walked quickly toward the kitchen. This time she didn't stop. Steven reached for his iced tea without hurry. Chuck finally let his gaze drift, slow and natural, toward the corner booth. For men, the one in the gray shirt was broad across the chest, maybe 50, with the look of a man who had spent his whole life being told yes. He was talking, his mouth working steadily, and 2 of his companions were laughing in that way people laugh when they're trying to impress someone. The 4th man, younger, was watching Chuck and Steven with flat eyes. Deke Halford caught Chuck's glance and held it. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind that said, "I see you, and I'm not worried." Chuck looked away and picked up his iced tea. Let the food come first. The soup arrived. Then the steaks, sizzling on cast iron plates, smelling exactly the way a good ribeye should smell on a Friday evening in Texas. Kara set everything down with practiced care, her movements quieter now, more controlled. She had made her choice when she came back to that table, and something in her seemed to have settled because of it. They ate. The food was good, the kind of good that doesn't need to be talked about. Chuck cut into his ribeye and chewed slow and let himself just be present for a few minutes. Across from him, Steven ate with the same unhurried calm, his eyes doing their quiet work around the room without making it obvious. Halfway through the meal, Deke Halford stood up from his booth. He was a big man, not tall, but wide and heavy the way some men get when they've had too much of everything for too long. He walked toward their table with his thumbs hooked in his belt, his companions watching from the corner like they were waiting to see how a show would open. He stopped at the edge of their table, looked down at them with that same stretched smile, and said, "Well, I'll be Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal. In my county." Chuck set his fork down. His voice came out easy and polite. "Evening." Deke pulled a chair from the empty table beside them and sat himself down without being asked. "Big fan," he said. "Really. Grew up watching you boys. Walker, Texas Ranger, all those action movies. Good stuff." He leaned forward. "Course, that's all make-believe, isn't it? Choreographed. Stuntmen doing half the work." He chuckled like he'd said something clever. "Out here in the real world, though, things work a little different." Steven looked at him. "What things are you referring to?" Deke spread his hands wide like he was describing something that should be obvious to everyone in the room. "The way things run. Who belongs where? Who gets what kind of service?" He smiled again. "I own 4 buildings on Main Street. 2 more out on Route 9. The man who owns this restaurant pays me rent. Just so we understand each other." Chuck picked up his fork again. "We understand you just fine." Deke's smile got a little thinner. "Good. Then you'll understand when I tell you that tonight's been real nice. But some of the folks in here are starting to make my customers uncomfortable, and I'd appreciate it if things wrapped up soon." "Which folks?" Steven said. His voice was as flat and quiet as still water. Deke's eyes moved across the room for just a second, quick but unmistakable, landing on the young couple by the window, on the old man at the counter, on the family in the back with the soccer kids. Then he looked back at Chuck and smiled like he hadn't done anything at all. Chuck set his fork down a second time. He looked at Deke with the kind of calm that has weight behind it, The kind of calm that comes from a man who has been in real situations and knows exactly what he's dealing with. Those are paying customers, Chuck said. Same as us. Deke tilted his head slightly. I'm just saying the atmosphere matters. You understand atmosphere. You both spent your careers worrying about how things looked on screen. Steven leaned forward just enough. The atmosphere in here is fine. You're the only thing in this room making people uncomfortable right now. Deke's smile held, but something shifted behind his eyes. He stood up, unhurried, like a man who had all the time in the world. I think we got our signals crossed. He pushed the chair back. You enjoy your steaks. He walked back to his booth without looking at them again. Steven watched him go. Chuck picked his fork back up. They both ate for a minute in silence. Then Kara appeared beside the table. She was trembling slightly. I'm sorry, she said. He does that. Comes over to tables he wants gone. Most people just leave. Chuck looked up at her. How long has this been going on? She let out a slow breath. 2 years at least. Maybe more. The owner, Mr. Miller, he's a good man, but Deke holds his lease. If Mr. Miller says anything, Deke threatens to pull the lease or raise the rent until the place closes. So Mr. Miller keeps quiet, and Deke keeps coming in and deciding who gets to stay. Steven's jaw tightened. And the other people, the ones he pushed out. Kara's voice dropped. He ran off the Hendersons last month. Nice older couple. Had been coming here since before I was born. He just walked over, stood there, didn't even say words the first time. Just stood there staring until they got uncomfortable enough to leave. She paused. Nobody said anything. Not even me. Her eyes dropped to the floor. I've been ashamed of that ever since. Chuck's voice came quiet but steady. You said something tonight. She looked up. That matters, he said simply. Before she could answer, a commotion broke out near the door. One of Deke's men had gotten up and was standing over the table with the young couple, arms crossed, talking to them in a low voice that wasn't low enough. Chuck caught the words "don't belong" and "move along" and the look on the young woman's face. Her chin lifted and her eyes bright with the effort of not crying in public. Chuck was out of the booth before he'd made a conscious decision to move. Steven was half a step behind him. They crossed the room at a steady walk. Nothing rushed, nothing theatrical, just two men covering ground with purpose. Deke's man saw them coming, and his posture changed just slightly. The way posture always changes when the math of a situation stops adding up the way you thought it would. Chuck stopped beside the table and looked at the young couple first. You folks all right? The young man nodded, his arm around his girlfriend's shoulder. He was trying to look calm and mostly pulling it off. We're fine. Just finishing our dinner. Good, Chuck said. He turned to Deke's man, a younger guy with a shaved head and a look on his face like he was still deciding whether to keep going. Chuck's voice was level and clear. They're finishing their dinner. You can head back to your table. The man's eyes went hard. You don't run this place, old man. Steven stepped up beside Chuck. Neither do you. The man looked from one to the other. Behind him, from the corner booth, Deke was watching with those flat, careful eyes, weighing things. The man with the shaved head held the moment another second, and then the math caught up with him, and he turned and walked back toward the corner without another word. The room exhaled. The young woman pressed her hand over her mouth briefly, then composed herself. Thank you, she said softly. Chuck nodded. You take your time. Enjoy your evening. He and Steven walked back to their table. Kara was standing near the service station watching everything, her hand pressed against her chest. Around the room, faces that had been carefully staring at plates were now looking up. The old man at the counter had turned on his stool. The family with the soccer kids had gone quiet, watching. Chuck sat down, picked up his iced tea, and took a long, slow sip. The room didn't go back to normal right away. It held for a moment, deciding something. And then, from the counter, the old man said loud enough for most of the room to hear, "About time somebody said something." A few people laughed, the nervous kind that breaks tension. Someone else at a far table clapped once, then stopped, then clapped again more firmly, and a few others joined in, brief and genuine. Deke Halford sat in his corner booth looking at nothing in particular, and for the first time all evening, he wasn't smiling. Kara came over and refilled their iced teas, her hand steadier now. You didn't have to do that, she said. Sure we did, Steven told her. She looked around the room, at the faces that were softer now, at the young couple laughing quietly about something again, at the old man who had gone back to his coffee but was sitting a little straighter. She looked like a person who had been carrying a weight and had just felt someone else put a hand under it. It went quiet again after that, the good kind of quiet. Chuck and Steven finished their steaks. The food had stayed warm, which Chuck took as a small sign that things were going the right direction. When Deke and his men left, which they did about 20 minutes later without ceremony, the door barely made a sound behind them. A few people watched them go. Nobody looked sorry to see the space open up. Kara brought the check. Chuck flipped it open, looked at the number, and pulled enough bills from his wallet to more than cover it. He set them inside the folder and closed it without making anything of it. Kara picked it up, glanced inside, and shook her head. "This is too much. Hold on to it," Chuck said. "You did something brave tonight when you came and told us what was happening. Most people don't do that. Most people decide it's not their problem." Her eyes got bright. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I stood in the kitchen for 5 minutes arguing with myself." Steven smiled at that. "But you came out." She nodded slowly. "That's the whole thing right there," Chuck told her. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do it even when you are." She tucked the check folder against her chest and stood there for a moment like she wanted to say more and wasn't sure how. Finally, she said, "He's going to find out his leash trick doesn't work forever. Mr. Miller has been talking to a lawyer. He didn't tell anyone, but I overheard. After tonight, maybe he'll feel like he can actually follow through." Chuck nodded. "Tell Mr. Miller that what happened tonight didn't go unnoticed. Sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is finally hold the line." She smiled, real and full this time. "I will." They stood to leave, pulling on their jackets in the warm way of men who have eaten well and don't need to rush anywhere. As they moved toward the door, the room acknowledged them the way rooms do sometimes, without fanfare, just a series of nods and quiet looks that meant something. The old man at the counter raised his coffee cup. The young couple gave a small wave. The family in the back, the parents more than the kids, looked at them with the kind of gratitude that sits too deep for words. Chuck pushed open the door and stepped out into the night. The parking lot was quiet, the string lights along the roof of Miller's Steakhouse throwing a soft, warm glow over the gravel. The air smelled like summer and hickory smoke and something that felt a lot like things turning in the right direction. Steven stopped beside his car and looked back at the restaurant. The lights inside were bright, and the silhouettes of people moved behind the windows, eating and talking and laughing like a place should on a Friday evening. "Think it'll stick?" Steven said. Chuck thought about Kara standing in that kitchen, arguing with herself, and coming out anyway. He thought about the old man on the bar stool. He thought about the young couple staying in their seats, and about Mr. Miller and a lawyer in a quiet conversation nobody was supposed to hear. "Already is," he said. They stood there a moment longer in the comfortable way of people who don't need to make a moment bigger than it already is. Then they shook hands, clapped each other on the shoulder, and walked to their trucks. Chuck sat in his cab for a minute before starting the engine, the way he sometimes did after a long day when he needed a second to let things settle. Through the restaurant window, he could see Kara moving between tables, her shoulders loose now, her braid catching the light. She stopped to say something to the young couple and laughed at whatever they said back. He started the truck, let it idle for a moment, then pulled slowly out of the lot. Behind him, the lights of Miller's Steakhouse glowed warm against the Texas dark, and inside it a place that had been quietly shrinking for 2 years had started, in the smallest but most real way, to breathe again. And that was enough for a Friday night.